Speaker's Corner aboard the Villa Vie Odyssey, hosted by Kit Cassingham.
Good evening, Odyssey residents.
Good evening, Mrs. Cassingham.
Good evening, Mr. Cassingham. Good evening, Mr. Taft. This is Speaker's Corner, as you probably figured out and anticipated.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here.
Is that why we're here?
Well, I don't know why you're here, Gus, but tonight's speaker is a man of many interests. He studied to be a lawyer. He studied to be a doctor. He's studying to be a researcher. He loves AI. He's doing our Troubadour group. You just never know what you're going to get. So let's invite Joe Braun up to talk about the future of medicine.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. Every time I give this talk, it's a little bit different because it seems like I'm finding more and more things out. And I've really kind of tried to tailor this particular talk to the audience here. And so even though this says how to navigate medicine over the 20 years in healthcare, what I'm really going to be talking about is how to survive as a resident of the Odyssey over the next 20 years despite healthcare. So anyway, Anyway, I usually start off with a quote, especially when I'm talking about stuff like this. My favorite American philosopher is Yogi Berra. And he once said, "It's really difficult to predict things, especially when it involves the future." So, Anyway, with that, we'll get going here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about medicine as we used to know it, medicine as it is now. And then I'm going to kind of launch into some things about, what the forces that are causing medicine to change and the changes we're going to see. The way I'm going to keep my audience tonight is at the end of the talk, I'm going to talk about two things that I think are of particular interest to everybody. One is something called precision aging, which is a really new field in medicine, and it's becoming very, very, very popular, especially among this audience, I'm sure. The second thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is how to judge medical care when you're getting it overseas. There are some basic guidelines I just wanted to kind of bring up, and if at some time you all want me to talk better or in a larger context about that, I'd be happy to. So, okay, let's get going. All right, what's changed about medicine? Geez, what hasn't changed about medicine? I remember when doctors knew less, but they touched you more. When they didn't spend the entire visit working on a computer. When they actually filed your insurance. When you actually could get an appointment. I mean, it's become a real problem getting into doctors' offices now. And, a lot of times when you get in there, he sees you for 5 minutes and he refers you to 4 different specialists because he's not going to take care of you. So, and you felt the doctor was a part of your family. I remember, when I was a kid, my parents used to say, Dr. McCall, he's a family member. We didn't have him over for dinner, but we were so sick all the time. There were 4 of us. He was there a lot. So here's where we are now. I mean, any of you that have tried to file an insurance claim lately know that it is a real hassle to try and get this stuff done. I mean, we have a shortage of doctors, we have a shortage of facilities, we have a very complicated medical system. It's not in a good place. So let's hope we can change it. So there are basically 8 forces of change that I'm going to kind of touch on a little bit. They range all the way from the social and demographic all the way down to anthropological and cultural. All these things tend to kind of work on the future as it is, and they are things that you kind of need to consider when you're trying to predict the future, like Yogi said. Did I say Yogi Bear or did I say Yogi Bear? One lives in Flintstone, the other one's anyway. So there's some major guiding truths that we have to look at here. I think we can all agree that a healthy population is a more productive population. We also probably agree that technology cannot solve everything as much as we'd like to think it could. It simply can't do it. And finally, I think we all feel that a well-informed population is the best defense against disaster. Now, Thomas Jefferson said that 300 years ago. It's very much the same now, and it's part of the reason I'm giving this talk tonight, to get you all to be informed consumers of future health care. Okay, the pace of change is just unbelievable. Everybody talks about Moore's Law. It turns out Moore's Law doesn't just only apply to computers, doubling every year. It applies to most technologies. And the thing that I think is fascinating on this slide, 72% of medical knowledge has been found in the last 50 years. Well, I picked 50 years because I graduated from medical school 50 years ago, so that means only 28% of what I learned is current. I don't, that's the reason we do a lot of CME and stuff. But probably what I didn't put on this slide is the fact that in the last 10 years, probably half of that information has been discovered. And we're really starting to grow this stuff at an unbelievable rate. And this is kind of a graphic indication of this. If we use the number of articles published as a surrogate, last year 12 million medical articles were published. And you can see that curve kind of just takes off like a rocket. That's what's going to happen with technology, we think. There are going to be things that are, I thought about making this a gee whiz, oh my gosh type of presentation with all these, bells and whistles and Flash Gordon type stuff. But what I really want to do is try and give you a reasonable guidebook for these next few years, because things are growing. You need to know what you're doing. So we talk about economics. When we talk about economics, we have to talk about economics because there's a certain amount of resources. Now he can't see me in the camera. He's going that way. Okay. We have to talk about matching resources against money. Let's face it. There's only so much money out there. The resources that are needed are growing. The technology that's out there is growing. These things are getting expensive, but there's still that amount of money there. We have to match those two things together. And as we well know, the government, I'm not going to talk about politics, but the government kind of tends to get its fingers in everything. And about 50 to 60% of every healthcare dollar in one way or another is touched by the government. Social forces. Well, I think this room says it. The fastest growing segment of the population right now is the people over 100 years of age. And we're going to talk about that a little bit because it's fast growing, but are those people having a good quality of life? And it's something we need to think about. All of this affects the need for health care. Let's face it, as we get older, unfortunately, we start getting chronic diseases. We need more medical care. And also, some of us become disabled, they require more care, and some of us become indigent. All these things add up to the point that we're going to have to figure out how to balance these resources against the money. And this kind of proves my point here. This one slide shows the growth in the United States. Now, you notice something very interesting about this. It tends to flatten out at the end. We're approaching what's called zero replacement rate. That means simply that the number of people dying every year is not replaced by the number of people born. Europe has already reached this in a lot of countries. China, surprisingly enough, is going to have that problem too, due to their policy over the last 30 years of one child only. They really kind of got themselves in a jam. But what's even worse, if you look over here, the red lines show the percentage of the population or the different ages. You can see the one that's growing. It's the older folks, Again, people requiring more care, people requiring more medicine. So that's kind of what we're up against. And again, the economic forces, we have to balance these things. Let's face it, right now, the national debt keeps growing. We can't continue to take and fund things like Medicare and run, if an insurance company ran their company at a loss, they wouldn't be in business very long. Well, Medicare is having that same problem right now. They're having a problem with being able to take and find enough money in the coffers to fund all the things that are doing. And economic growth has kind of stabilized a little bit. Real income has dropped. It's either the same or it's dropped. So that means in real terms, we don't have as much money to go out there and buy things with these inflated prices that we see. And the bottom of the slide is something that to me is just amazing. 22% of the gross domestic product, that means the entire economy, is spent on health care. Yep. So that's $6 trillion. I mean, that's trillion with a T. I mean, you can see, I mean, there's a problem here. I mean, one of every $5 is going for health care. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I'm getting my money's worth. You know, it's problematic.
Jim,
but, yeah.
How does that percentage compare with other countries?
It's way higher. Like Germany spends, we have our German friends here, they spend...
Because of liability.
Huh?
It's because of liability insurance.
Well, no, it's not just liability insurance. That is one factor, something called defensive medicine. The thing is we charge more for things. Any of you that have bought any GLP-1s recently overseas, you pay $60 in a place like Singapore, you go back to the States and it's $1,500.
Because of liability insurance.
Well, the liability insurance has actually come under control for a bunch of different reasons. Most doctors are employed nowadays, and so the emphasis is on the employers rather than the individual people. But we can talk a little bit more about that. But there is no impetus to change this system. You got $6 trillion out there. You got big hospital corporations. You got big pharmaceutical corporations. My daughter, who's a dermatologist in San Diego, just recently got bought by a venture capital group. We have people with MBAs running this system, not MDs. So it's no wonder we're starting to have problems with care. They're worried about one thing, the dollar. A doctor should be worried about getting you better. So you can see there are many problems. Here are some projections. We could have a shortage of up to 77,000 primary care doctors. They're the touch points for most of us to get into the medical system. Also, there's going to be a shortage of up to 77,000 specialty doctors too. We're not putting, I just retired from a medical school. We cannot put out enough doctors to take care to cover all of this. So anyway, oh, and besides that, they're not in the right places at the right time. Like I say, I was teaching at a medical school. We were putting out as many doctors as we could, but it's still not enough. COVID caused a problem too, because like in Florida alone, they did a survey and they found out fully one-fifth of the doctors planned to retire in the next 5 years because of all the stresses from COVID. So not only are we not producing enough, we're having a bunch of them, older people like me, retire. And they're not in the right places. They're not in the rural areas. They're not in the places where we need for them to be. And we're not the only ones. If you look on here, all of these rust and red colors, those are countries that have real problems with doctor shortages. Now, it's interesting that China doesn't have one, but China is a different sort of thing. And I'll talk a little bit about this when I talk about medical care overseas. Let me just share a little story with you. I was on a trip to China one time, and I just had surgery in my eye. And after I had the surgery, I had some problems when I was in Beijing. And so they took me to the tour guide took me to a hospital. We walked into this hospital. It was like a gymnasium, and all these people were on the floor, and they were holding IV bags. I walked up to the nurse's station. I thought she was handling radioactive material. I mean, she had 6 inches of plate glass in front of her, had these gloves on that she probably could have done, a radiological examination or something like that. I go up there and she says, "Oh, you're in the wrong place. You need to go around the corner." Well, I go around the corner. There's this big, beautiful marble and steel and glass place. I walk in there. There's 3 of us in there, all foreigners. I'm in there, the emergency room doctor sees me, the ophthalmologist comes down, sees me. Ophthalmologist in a hospital, can you imagine that? That doesn't happen in America. And when I left, they gave me the medications, they gave me the bill. It was $67. Now that would be probably more like $6,700, if that little. I mean, you can see there's a gross disparity about what we're charging and what the American medical system is doing. It's a bloated, wasteful system. And we're having problems with nurses too. I mean, even more nurses have said because of COVID they were retiring because they were the ones really on the front line. Most of the times the nurses are on the front lines. They're the ones that are taking care of the patients in ICUs and such. And a lot of them really, really got burned out taking care of these people, watching them die and watching the doctors try and save people. So we're going to have a real shortage of nurses too. Getting back to this technological forces, I mean, we know that we can make all sorts of things. We can make better imaging machines. We can make machines that do surgery and like that. But the fact is, these things are expensive. And so somebody, again, has to pay for them. We'll talk a little bit later about the fact that the scope of medicine is kind of changing. We're going to have to find ways not only to pay for them, but there's a real problem with equal access to care. People that have a lot of money can get a lot different medical care, even in the United States, than people that don't have a lot of money, because they can get access to the best specialists, go to the best hospitals and like that. And don't kid yourself, even in the United States, there's a big difference between hospitals and doctors. One of the things that we're going to start seeing is a change from what's called chemical medicine to genomic or genetic medicine. What that means basically, in the past, if you got sick, somebody would give you a pill, somebody would give you, an IV or like that. Those things were chemical compounds, okay? So we had a chemistry-based system of care. We are going to move to a genetic-based care. Your genome will be the basis for treatment in the future. And as a result of that, by matching that to the disease, you'll have individualized care done for you based on that genome and based on your genome. We'll also have what are called constant wearable monitors. I look out there and I see a lot of us already adapted them. That's a monitor, a very good one, in fact. It keeps getting better and better. Mine today told me that it could tell me if my blood pressure was high, and I'm going, I didn't feel it getting tighter around my wrist. I don't know how I was doing bad. I don't know. Leave it to Apple to figure it out, though. Artificial intelligence, like I talked about before. This is going to become a very important part of medicine because, as I mentioned before, there are so many articles, there's so much knowledge out there. One person can't know this. An AI can go in there and parse out the information that's needed for, say, like a specific type of cancer or something like that, and get that information to the person that needs it. And AI nowadays can take a very good history and physical. I talked a little bit about the recorders that they're putting in rooms that are recording the entire history and physical and giving real-time dictation. This is going to expand and expand and expand. It may get to the point where you walk in the room, there won't even be a doctor in there. There'll be a machine, and it'll be doing your physical, or it'll be doing your history, and it'll come up with the diagnosis, and may or may not write the prescription. I hope it doesn't, but we still need doctors in there someplace. Robotics, we talked about that. 20 years from now, surgeons will not be operating by themselves. Surgeons, every surgery done will be done by robotics. And they'll either be autonomous type robots, in other words, ones that run by themselves, or they'll be aided by surgeons. But this again brings a problem. What's going to happen to the skills of those surgeons? They spent 7 years learning how to be a surgeon. Now all of a sudden the robot's doing all the work. You get a little worried if they aren't in there practicing every once in a while, their skills are going to erode. So there's both a good and a bad about everything. And now, this is something called Joven's paradox. You remember I talked to you about technology can make things better. Everybody invents a better mousetrap, but when you invent a better mousetrap, what happens? Everybody then wants the better mousetrap, and so the resources that you've saved by inventing the better mousetrap goes away because everybody wants one. Same thing happens in medicine. You get an MRI machine in the United States, all of a sudden every hospital has to have one of these $2 million MRI machines. We don't really need that many. Canada has less MRI machines in the whole country than we do in the city of New York, not even just the state. So there's a lot of technology that's being used. And again, the more technology we have, the more expensive that medical system is. And we have to pay for that. I have to keep coming back to that. Okay, as I said, the nursing profession will be under a lot of pressure over the next years. You know, for a while we thought nurse practitioners and physician's assistant, and I know there's somebody out there that are this, would be the solution to this shortage of primary care doctors. And we started training about 40 years ago. We started all these programs and we were pushing people in the system. They didn't become primary care doctors. They went and apprenticed with an orthopedist or a dermatologist or like that and became specialists. So again, that gap that was supposed to be filled by these primary care nurse practitioners and PAs, it just didn't happen. And one thing that's interesting about PAs and nurse practitioners in some states like Texas, in areas that are underserved, you know, there's parts of West Texas where there's more cows than people. In those areas, the nurse practitioners can actually go out there and practice independently as long as they have communication with the doctor. So again, we're trying to figure out ways to take care of these rural areas. Rural areas have really got a problem. The hospitals that are closing, most of them are in rural areas. Primary care doctors are going to be trained differently. They're going to be arbiters of information. When you go in there, they're not going to be examining you like that. They're going to be telling you what that AI found. They're going to be telling you what was in your medical records. They're going to be telling you about what was found when the AI did the research on whatever condition you have. They'll be working as part of a team of doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, nurse practitioners. They'll be part of a team, and that team will be the one that takes care of you. But again, the role of the primary care doctor is going to move from that of being a carer to an arbiter of information. That concerns me. I don't know if it concerns you. We actually have had complaints, and you know, I work with some of the boards and like that, about doctors. Patients go in and the patient is never even touched by the doctor. I mean, I just can't even imagine that, but it happens more than you'd like to think. You know, we still need to have these human touches in there. And of course, I won't even go into the payment system. We've already been talking about that. All right, so now we're getting into the good stuff. Geriatric care. Geriatrics is a specific type of medical training. As we get older, the physiology of our body changes. The way we take and use drugs, the way we walk, our skin, all sorts of things change. Most doctors are not trained in how to handle situations like this. Geriatricians are, but nobody's going into it. There's only 2.5 geriatricians for every 10,000 of the population in the United States. This is some place that people ought to be going into because, let's face it, the population's not getting any younger. We need doctors that know how to handle them. Long-term care. 50% of Americans at one time or another in their life are going to require assisted living facilities, SNFs, long-term care. And we are not ready for this. We don't have enough facilities, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough doctors. I mean, this is, you know, what they're trying to do more and more now. There was a project that the government was doing where they were actually paying the members of the family to take care of their family members at home rather than sending them into one of these facilities. And it actually ended about 2 years ago. It was very successful, but for some reason, recently it wasn't refunded, but we won't go into that again. But you know what I'm talking about. And long-term care has a problem with financing, obviously. It has a problem with resources. It has a problem with infrastructure. It has a problem with workforce. If you go into a nursing home nowadays, the caretakers that touch or work with your patients most of the time are not trained. They're not even semi-skilled a lot. They're people that will work for $12 or $15 an hour and come in there and work with your mom or your dad or even you. So we've got a problem there because the people that are supposed to be taking care of us are people that's supposed to be knowing what they're doing, and they're not. What's happened is there's now an increased emphasis on something called hospice care and palliative medicine. We have discovered over the last 40 years or so that almost 50% of healthcare is done in the last year or two of life. And oftentimes it's done in a vain attempt to keep somebody alive that probably would be better off not alive. So we're spending all this money really spinning our wheels and we're not getting anything for it. Palliative medicine comes in, it keeps people comfortable as they're going through the process of dying. Let's face it, the process of dying, and I've seen a lot of people unfortunately die, is painful sometimes. Palliative medicine doctors know how to handle this. They know how to keep the patients comfortable, know how to handle them in their home. I was just recently involved in a case where somebody wanted to die at home, but there was a small problem. They were intubated on a respirator. Well, we managed to work out something with one of the nursing facilities to take and move a respirator home with that patient by ambulance, and that's where we extubated them, and that's where they died. That was their wish, and we were able to grant that wish for them. More and more, we're looking to do things like that because, you know, you don't want to die in a hospital all by yourself. You want to be around your family. You want to have the people that love you there and not, you know, the nurses that aren't even trained, right, or like that. This is going to blow your mind. We are not done with pandemics. Right now, we are pushing back against nature. We're clearing rainforests. We're clearing areas where all these zoonoses, these bacteria, these viruses, and things like that are at. Sooner or later, another one's going to take and jump into the human population, and we're going to be right back where we were with COVID. An even more dire situation is if some bioterrorist decides to take and engineer some sort of pathogen and release it into the humankind. I mean, we're a global people. We travel a lot. We're in close quarters like here. It doesn't take long for something to travel literally around the world. There will be another pandemic. Now, the people that I know that used to work at the CDC, but that's another story, told me that they felt it was probably not going to be for about 10 to 15 years, but hopefully we won't have to put up with it because we had a lot of problems with the last one, as we well know. Okay, this is where we're going to start talking about personalized medicine a little bit. As I mentioned to you, your genome is going to be very, very important. The doctor will have what your genome looks like. When you have cancer, they're going to take a little piece of that cell and send it off and have the genetic makeup of that, the genetic markers on that cell determined. And they're going to go into these databases and come up with a personal recommendation for you. Monoclonal antibodies, different things to take and treat that cancer for you and individually and much more effectively. Somebody was telling me recently they had a friend that was dying of melanoma. I was kind of surprised to hear that because one of the very effective uses of monoclonal antibodies has been in disseminated melanoma. Melanoma, of course, you know, is a skin thing, and that's the reason we all put our suntan lotion on and like that. But it gets in the body and it disseminates very quickly. In the past, if somebody had this, they were goners. There was nothing you could do. Now with some of these monoclonal antibodies, we have a pretty good chance of at least slowing it down and maybe even curing it. The other thing that's going to happen, like I was mentioning to you before, we have drugs, but we don't have enough of them. And to top it all off, the bugs are starting to get resistant to them. We're having more problems treating things like hypertension. There's all sorts of, we only have so many chemicals right now. What is happening in a lot of the research areas right now, they're using something called protein folding programs. This is where they take the actual makeup of the gene and put it in 3D, and then they take these different chemicals and fold those in there and see if they match. Most drugs work by working in something called a receptor. They can do this with a computer now. They don't have to do the field tests. They can come up with a medication de novo just from what they're doing with AI and the computer. The timeline for new medications is dropping. It used to be about 10 years. It's dropping down to around 2 or 3 years now because these new medications will be out there much quicker. All right, this is the take-home place. Precision aging, which means growing older without feeling old. By the way, I'm the one on the left. I don't know if you noticed me or not, but Scientists are now treating aging like it should have been treated, and they're treating it as a disease. They're treating it as a process. And what they're doing is really trying to make efforts to try and reverse or at least ameliorate the ideas of death or of aging. Some of them have got so good at it, they think that eventually we're going to get rid of death. Death is a disease to be cured, according to some of them. So when we're talking about precision medicine, we're talking about taking and aiming medical treatments at each particular individual as they age. One of the big problems we've had, remember I talked about all the people over the age of 100 that were, that big growing. We've looked at chronological age in the past. That's not what we should be looking at. What we should be looking at is biological age. We should be looking at the chemical process, the skin, the muscles, and like that. As we well know, there are 75-year-olds that are on cruise ships like us, and there are 75-year-olds that they can barely get out of their bed back home. There's a big difference in chronological age. So what we need to start doing is looking at biological age, and that'll allow us to do a bunch of things. Right now, I mentioned the thing about wearables. I gave a talk not too long ago. The field of wearables is blowing up. They have things that can print under your skin nowadays to take and monitor your heart, monitor your blood pressure. We know that they have these like freestyles where you can put it on the back of your arm and it'll monitor blood pressure or blood glucose. We're going to be see more and more of these wearables. Some of them very they're so small that they really aren't obtrusive. You can wear them. What that is going to do, it's going to take and move medicine. We need to move medicine from what's called the model we use now. We react. If somebody gets sick, we react. That's not what we should be doing. We should prevent things. We should know about them ahead of time. These wearables will allow us to do that. These wearables will allow us to predict what's going to go on. These wearables will allow us to take and treat a disease even before it becomes a disease. Frailty will become a vital sign like blood pressure and temperature and like that. You'll have things on the charts that'll show you the fat composition of somebody's skin. It'll have chemical markers on there. It'll talk about all sorts of different things that we know that we can measure that determine somebody's biological versus their chronological age. We know that some people are doing much better. They have more muscle mass. Their skin is not paper-like and like that. These are all things that will be measured and thought about by these doctors doing this precision aging. And longevity medication will become very mainstream. There was, a couple of years ago, a lot of people were being put on the statins, not just for the effects that it has in cholesterol. A scientist found out that people taking statins, if they can take statins, there are some people that can't, it decreased the amount of inflammation in the body. And they've decided that inflammation is one of those things that causes aging. And they figured if they could go, there's a long-term study right now where people are taking this medication and they're looking at these markers to see if in fact taking this medication enlarges your life, not just because the cholesterol drops, but because you're controlling the amount of inflammation in the body. We're going to talk about metabolic optimization. Okay, that just simply means better diets. I mean, I don't have much. Me and Robert Kennedy don't seem eye to eye about a lot of things, but he is right. The American diet sucks. I mean, we have way too many prepared foods. We have way too many preservatives. I know there's a couple of people on a ship that have very restricted diets, but they may be onto something. In the future, what we'll do is we'll have diets that are tailored to us. Some of us that have poor problems with kidney function may be eating one diet, whereas somebody that's having heart problems may be eating another diet. I mean, again, individualized care. Muscle conservation. What's the big thing that gets people our age in trouble? Mobility. What happens a lot of times, somebody quits walking, and all of a sudden they're in bed or in a chair all the time. Even worse, they're walking and they trip. Once you trip, and you're our age, for many people, that is the tipping point. That is the time that your health is going to start going down. And a lot of that can be prevented by taking and making sure that you have the proper balance and make sure you have the proper muscle strength. Also helps if you don't have rugs you can trip over in your house too. But you know, there are medical reasons to take and look at this. Senolytic therapy. There are things called zombie cells that run around your body. They're basically cells with no purpose, and they can be harmful. These senolytics go in there and actually can take and kill these things and get them out of your system. Some of these common drugs like metformin, rapamycin, and like that have been found, like the statins, to have some effect on the aging process, and they're being studied in that regard nowadays. We're finding newer drugs that are also being involved in this process too. Probably the take-home thing, though, is the genetic treatments. Aging, as we know, is a process of inflammation. It's also a process of there are something called telomeres, which are the end of the genes. And people, as we age, we find out those telomeres get screwed up, and all of a sudden the gene can't take and replicate like it used to. They're using genetic engineering now, going in and reconstructing these genes and making them where they don't have this problem with the telomeres anymore. The other part of the cell that they're looking at is something called mitochondria. I don't know how many of you knew this, but every person in here, whether they're male or female, has maternal mitochondria in them. It's, you know, if we go back all the way, we go back to Eve. Eve's mitochondria probably isn't everybody, because that's the part of the cell that's passed down in the egg. The sperm, a little tiny sperm, doesn't contribute much. You know, we don't do much work anyway raising kids, and we sure don't contribute a lot to the cell growth. But anyway, so we're going to see things like that. We're going to see mitochondrial, they're basically the steam engine of the body. We're going to see those things rejuvenated by genetic engineering and stuff as well. And again, we're identifying more and more biomarkers that are telling us these are things that need to be controlled. These are things that we need to look at in order to keep somebody from aging faster than they should be. And again, go back to, is death a curable disease? I mean, you know, I don't know if I'm going to put my money on it, but, you know, I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, science can do a lot of things. Okay, so I am going to make one very bold prediction here. I'm going to predict that at some point, the U.S. medical system is going to become so expensive that somebody's going to have to say, all right, well, Medicare and Medicaid expansions are going to be the single payer system that the United States goes to. I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen, but right now I can tell you the insurance companies are making a hell of a lot of money off of us. And they're doing it by doing things like, as somebody was pointing out at our dinner tonight, by withholding care, making it difficult for get our claims paid and like that. A single payer system has a benefit of lowering the administrative costs and lowering the hassle. The humanity. That's the Hindenburg. Like I said, at some point that may be our medical system going down in flames. But the other reason I wanted to bring this up is, remember I was talking about that humanity in medicine? When I was at the medical school, one of the things I was teaching was medical humanities. I was teaching students how to take and touch patients. I was using things like improv to teach them how to be able to talk to patients, how to be able to elicit stories from them. You know, basically when you take a history and physical, you're telling a story to your doctor. So those are the things that need to be in there. What technology can't replace? Well, you know, it can't replace good medical judgment. It can't replace the trust that you have in your doctor. It can't take away that bedside presence. I mean, we want to have people touch us. So we want to have people out there. Also, you know, a computer doesn't deal well with uncertainty or moral decisions, and it really, really doesn't do very well in terms of compassion. We want warm, fuzzy people as our doctors, and right now we're not getting that. All right, switching gears. I'm going to talk a little bit about medical care overseas. Why am I doing this? Well, I don't know if you noticed, but we're overseas right now. And so some of us are going to need medical care. So let me give you a few guidelines. The reason I'm talking about this, when I was at George Washington, I helped with the evacuation programs that they had for the travel insurances. And we did a study of some of the things that were important when you're looking for a hospital overseas. In terms of the future, rich countries will continue to make improvements in technologies. These are the first world countries like Germany or places like that, the United States. Poor countries they can't afford the technology, like I mentioned before. It's very, very expensive. They're going to make incremental gains, but they're still not going to come up to the quality they have in these first world countries. Little secret, you probably know this. Every country's healthcare system has two levels. There's a level where the people that can afford it, the people can access it, they get good care. There's a level down here that all the people out in the villages or the people can't afford it, that's the care they get. We want to be in this level up here if we're in a country overseas, and we'll talk about some ways that we can look and try and identify that. Okay, there's something called the Joint Commission International. You've probably heard of the Joint Commission in the United States. There's actually an international group that takes and does the same thing. It goes and certifies hospitals. They have a website you can go on to look up and see if your hospital is accredited. It's one thing that might tell you that one hospital is better than another. Another thing you might want to look for, is it a teaching hospital? Teaching hospitals tend to acquire more resources, they have more specialists. I mean, let's face it, they take better care of their patients. So if you can find one that's a teaching hospital, that's a good clue too. You want to look at specialist strength. You want to make sure, I mean, I know there's a lot of this medical tourism right now, and there's specialty hospitals overseas, all they do is hips or all they do is plastic surgery. There are hospitals in towns like Thailand. Thailand has some really great hospitals. I spent a lot of time there that have so many specialists, and they work on the specialists. They have good primary care too, but you want to be there because things are going to happen, and unfortunately, sometimes you need a specialist. So, if you find a hospital that's being promoted for medical tourism, that's probably a good clue too. 3 questions you want to ask when you're looking at a hospital. First one, is modern imaging available? Okay, and I don't mean just MRIs. Some places don't even have CAT scans. Some places don't even really have up-to-date radiology equipment. You want to make sure that there's modern imaging available someplace. Maybe not in that hospital, but maybe in some place where they can reach it. Is ICU backup available? We all hope when we go into the hospital that things are going to go great, we're going to get better, and we're going to go home. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes we go in the hospital and we get worse. And when we get worse, sometimes it comes to the point you have to be put into an intensive care unit. So you want to make sure that that's available in any hospital you look at. Other thing is you want to make sure there are senior specialists there. A lot of hospitals are run by residents or interns or what they call junior doctors in countries overseas. You want to make sure those junior doctors have access to specialty care, to their mentors, be able to do that. If you know people that are expats, a lot of times they have an idea of which hospitals are better in an area than others. I mean, these are all guidelines. I mean, they aren't going to apply to every specific thing, but they're things you should be asking yourself if you do need medical care overseas. Some of you I know are going to do optional medical care overseas. Some of you I know are going to get dental care. Some of you know are going to get plastic surgery. There are hospitals that are much better for those things than others. You want to make sure you do your research. I'll tell you a horror story. I had a lady that went to Mexico and had some plastic surgery done. She had her arms, the fat taken out of there, and she had the legs. She came into my emergency room, all these wounds had dehisced, and they were open because they didn't use sterile procedures down there. And so I couldn't do anything about it. All I could do is tape it together and put them on antibiotics because you can't re-sew a wound once it's come open. So you got to make sure before you go in there that you're picking the right place. some general guidelines. A beautiful building does not always mean there's going to be beautiful care inside. This, you know, we use beautiful a lot, especially in the United States nowadays, but a beautiful building is not always a key. You want to look beyond that. You want to see a place where care is concentrated. You want to make sure that, you know, this is a hospital where people in the country that are at that level I talked about come to. The best strategy, if you're going to go into a situation like this, and we had an example of this actually on the ship recently, patient flown out, found to have a particular problem, was stabilized, the diagnosis was made, they were sent to another hospital for definitive treatment. That's the best thing possible. If you can, you know, if you're in a situation, you want to be stabilized, you want to get the diagnosis, you want to know your diagnosis too, or somebody in your family know it, and you want to be sent to another place. Now, when I was working at George Washington, a lot of times we could use local hospitals, but sometimes we had to take and put somebody on an air ambulance and bring them back because there's just some levels of care, some things that can't be taken care of overseas still. Let me talk a little bit about the regions with strong medical care. We're actually pretty lucky. We're going to be going into one of them. Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, have really good hospital systems. So we're going to be in an area with particularly good health care. India, in certain concentrated areas, has high technological knowledge, very good hospitals. But again, it's for those people that are at this level. There's about 1 billion people that are down here. They don't get that kind of care. Unfortunately, we have to look for this kind of care when we go there. The Middle East has spent a lot of that oil money on bringing people like me overseas to set up medical schools, to set up hospitals. They've spent a ton of money. I mean, some of the, there's a couple of people in here I know that have worked overseas. These hospitals are just, they're modern, they're gorgeous, and the doctors are well trained. So when we go into the Middle East, if we ever get to the Middle East, if they don't bomb the crap out of each other over there, but you know, they're probably using the hospitals right now for all the people that are being hit by the, you know, the different things that they're shooting at one another. Eastern Europe, places like Turkey, a lot of people go to Turkey for dental care, go there for plastic surgery. There are areas that have really good care. Poland, actually, I think, is he in here? Poland actually has some areas that are really good medical care. Yeah, yeah, all right, she knows. And then the Czech Republic, too. When you get into Latin America, it becomes a little dicier. Places like Costa Rica and Colombia have pretty good medical care. In Mexico, you really have to be very careful about where you go. A lot of people down there, a lot of doctors advertise, you know, treatments, plastic surgery, things like that. You really have to watch what you're getting into, or you're going to end up with your wounds dehisced in my emergency room. And finally, South Africa. South Africa. There's a lot of doctors in the United States that are from South Africa. They have really good care over there. They train their doctors very well. They have great hospitals. So you can see there are certain hospitals or certain countries in these different regions that cater to us and have care, and we can look for those. Okay, well, I've brought up a lot of questions. Does anybody have any answers? Wait a minute, that should be the other way around. That's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
And wait for a mic. You've got 2 mic runners.
Thank you. You mentioned something like metformin or statins as being positive to helping offset other diseases, but metformin, for example, has always been known for impacting livers. So as we look at the changes in the chemistry, who wins out? The proactive, let's make life better, or ignore the negatives?
Well, I always tell people a medicine is a two-edged sword. It has a good benefit and it has a bad benefit. What the studies right now are looking at different medications, not just things like metformin or statins. They're looking at other medications to see if they do have some ability to take and lengthen lifespans. They do have bad effects too, but you have to balance that against their good effects. I always tell patients that, you know, be careful because there are side effects from anything you take. So, next question. Yes.
Thank you, Hazel. You mentioned that there was dietary requirements that need to be looked at. Do you advocate using vitamins, minerals?
Ooh, I knew I was going to get past that. Everything in moderation, okay? I know people that practically live off of vitamins. That's, you know, you sit down with them to eat dinner and they've got this plate of vitamins that they're eating, you know, and then they finally eat their meal. There are studies that show some of these vitamins are good for us, but again, these are things that we're studying. We know sometimes, like if you take too much vitamin A, you get vitaminosis from that, and that can mess up your liver. I had a guy one time was eating carrots. He was eating carrots all the time because of the carotene in him. His skin actually turned orange. It was weird. I mean, he looked like a gigantic carrot. It's a good thing there weren't any bunny rabbits around. Next question. The answer is yes, but we don't know exactly which ones are best versus others. Most of the doctors say replace what you have. We don't know if an excess of them helps at all. Yeah. Okay.
Joe, can I add to that and suggest always get your blood levels and body levels tested to see what you need to help supplements.
Yeah, exactly. There was a big deal in the States over the last 30 years about vitamin D deficiencies. The reason we were seeing vitamin D deficiencies, most of us run around with suntan lotion all over us and hats on our head, and vitamin D requires sun to be converted into the active form, which is vitamin D3. And we weren't doing that. So we saw a huge spate of people that had vitamin D deficiencies, and some of it could have been taken care of by just going out in the sun, but instead we gave them lots of expensive vitamin D capsules. Other questions?
So I have one here, Joe. You talked about, y'all going to go to my primary care physician, only it won't be a primary care physician. It's going to be a robot, right, or a computer. And that was the future. And then my doctor or whomever, the medical person would be there, would just be an advocate. And, would that be cost effective, and is that a way to help with the cost that you're talking about? I mean, can AI solve the problems? Because you also said, well, we need the technology to, it seems like, to reduce the cost, but then you need a person there because AI has failure points or can't do certain things. So how do you do the balance, and how do you resolve the cost issues? Okay,
well, that's a good question. I mean, I just recently gave a talk at a seminar about the use of AI to alleviate primary care shortages. It turns out that you can build a very inexpensive kiosk that uses incorporated AI and all sorts of things like computer vision like that. These things cost like about maybe less than $10,000 when you get done with everything. There's a cheaper model that we were looking at, and we were talking about using these things in places like Kenya, putting it out there, putting it on a Starlink link, and having it do the physicals and taking care of the medical problems of those people. You take that back to the United States, you have one of those inside there in your office, and you come in and you do that. All of a sudden that information is presented to your primary care doctor. In the next few years, primary care doctors are going to be sitting in front of 4 big screens, and every one of them is going to have that information coming up on it about the individual patients. So to answer your question about cost effectiveness, first of all, it costs a hell of a lot of money to train a doctor. It takes a long time. Computers learn very quickly, and they're cheap in the long run because once you've built one. Problem? No compassion, no touching, no warm fuzzies. So we have to balance again. Do we want care like that, or do we want to have compassionate care? Yeah.
I'm going to actually...
Well, hold on, wait for a microphone. And we've got somebody first. Now, hold on.
John.
Okay. I want to look at mathematics for a moment. In order to have a stable world or a stable humankind, it seems to me we have to start with the assumption that we need a relatively stable human population. Otherwise, there are other impacts, food supply, water supply, things like that. So if you have a relatively stable human population and you extend life period, then you have to have a decreasing reproduction rate. And the longer you extend lifetime, the lower the reproduction rate that was necessary to have a human population.
Right.
Which means less sex, less intimacy, and I wonder.
Well, some of
if
us
that's
live
a-
without it anyway, but I mean.
I wonder if that's a world I want to live in.
Well, you bring up a good point, but the thing is, there was a really great book called Death Takes a Holiday, and it talked in there about this very same thing. If death wasn't killing people, all of a sudden you have more and more people all the time. You know, right now, we know there are certain regions of the world, like Asia and Africa, that are producing most of the kids, and producing all the population growth. Those aren't the areas where this life extension will probably be aimed at first. It'll be aimed at areas like Europe, it'll be aimed at areas like the United States, basically the more developed countries. I mean, we could run into a problem. I mean, this is a kind of a mini example of that. A few years ago, when AIDS started rip-roaring through Africa, there were entire countries, there were entire areas in Africa where you would go, there would be nobody. Or there would be kids that were orphans because their parents had died. Once we started going over there and started giving them triple drug therapy, and we, you know, actually UNESCO has been pretty good about that, sending the medications over and like that. All of a sudden, people were starting to come back. The population was starting to grow. At some point, it's going to get to the point where there's too many people again. So, you know, it's just kind of a delicate balance that you have to run through things. You know, we can't have sex without creating babies. Did you know that, John? So, but you know, yeah, there are always issues. I mean, there's always good sides and bad things about it. I wish I had an answer to that. Yeah.
Okay, one last question.
So I was just going to go back to the topic of AI.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with really low blood, white blood
Mm-hmm.
cells. And finally the doctor said, oh, you probably have leukemia. And I went through the bone marrow test and all of that. And my doctor was really progressive and actually researched with the AI capabilities and said, oh, you're probably one of the few people that, and so I saw it 20 years ago where doctors are using AI. It was still a personal touch.
Right.
I sat there in the office and he was researching on the computer. So I see all this AI capability of being able to do a personal diagnosis, and the same thing with robotics is you're going in and you're saying, I have a bad knee, and you know the doctors are going to go in and do a robotic replacement. So I see this really positive, but that's not what I'm hearing you say.
No, well, no,
I heard you say it was going to be negative.
No, it's negative in the sense that that's the only thing that's done. If it's just the AI that you're interacting with, that's not good. What I'm saying is there need to still be people in there. They don't necessarily need to be doctors, but there need to be compassionate people in the system. Well, but the difference now is we actually have these kiosks and things that can do everything completely. They don't even have to have the doctor in there with them. They can examine you, they can do the research, they can look at the records. When we were thinking about putting these things in Kenya, we found out that we could use semi-trained personnel, people, in other words, that knew how to plug it in. That's really all we needed because the machine would do everything else. No people involved other than the person to plug it in. Now, do you want the person that plugs it in telling you about what your diagnosis is and such like that? We still have to have people in the system somehow.
That's a bigger.
Yeah, that's a big
That's
issue.
a bigger issue.
For sure.
It's a big topic, too. We'll cover another time.
That's a
You want
bigger
to?
Yeah.
Kevin has a question.
We're out of time.
We're out of time. Thank you. I'll be here all week. Actually, for the next 5 years.
So did you guys learn something new and interesting? Hold on, Kevin. Hold on. Sit.